everyone, welcome to the Charter School Connection podcast. I'm your host, Sean Wortham, and man, do I have a treat for you guys. I had the privilege to fly out to Long Beach, California, and visit with RJ Guest. He's the CEO of Muir Charter Schools out in California, and they are so unique. They work with the California Conservation Corps and other programs and organizations that help individuals get their life on track, get back in the workforce, and become good human beings and civilians that can give back to their society. And while they participate in these programs, John Muir partners with them so that they can get their high school diploma. It's super cool, their situation and the audience that they service. RJ has a ton of great points on his growth, how he became the CEO, how John Muir has become this large organization that it is today. But he also talks about challenges that he has, like fiscal challenges and declining enrollment statewide, and things that they are considering and working through in order to combat these challenges. So if you're a charter school administrator that has similar concerns about declining enrollment and how to stay on top of the wave, then man, I highly suggest this podcast. RJ's an expert that's been in the charter school space for 28 years, and he's just a cool guy. So I highly recommend you checking out John Muir Charter Schools and learning about the great things that they're doing out in California, and I hope you enjoy this podcast.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Charter School Connection podcast. I'm your host, Sean Wortham, and I'm here with RJ Guest from John Muir Charter Schools, and we're here in Long Beach, California on Saturday. It's the 7th of March, and RJ, thank you so much for taking time out of your weekend to chat with me, and how's it going today?
Oh, it's great. You know, it's a beautiful day, and I'm certainly very happy to be here and chat with you today in my hometown, Long Beach.
Yeah, Long Beach. You and me took some time to get to know each other a little bit more before recording, but I understand this is kind of where you're from, and you've kind of moved around here and there in California, but ultimately Long Beach is your home. I was wondering if you could explain to our listeners a little bit more your background, kind of your upbringing, how you got involved in the charter school space, just so people can understand a little bit about you.
Sure. So I was born and raised here in Long Beach. I'm a third generation graduate of Long Beach Poly High School. My grandma actually graduated in like 1932 or something like that. And this has always been home. My mom was a teacher in Long Beach Unified School District for 30 plus years. And when it was time for college, I went to Humboldt State University, which some people will now say Cal Poly Humboldt, but to those of us from the old days, it's always Humboldt State. And
Humboldt State.
and I got a bachelor's degree in political science from Humboldt State, and I came back to Long Beach afterwards and ended up being a substitute teacher, and not what I thought I was going to be doing. I figured I was going to be working in Sacramento on policy or more activist-related causes, but that didn't pay very much. So I ended up becoming a substitute. And you got to remember, this is like, you know, age 24, age 25, something like this, and they were paying $180 a day for a short-term sub and $210 a day for long-term. And I just kept thinking, like, man, that's so much money. And as a 24-year-old, you know, and so I guess you could say I was probably the only person in California that got into teaching for the money. And after a year of long-term subbing and teaching half a year of pre-algebra to 7th graders and then half a year of science to 8th graders, I actually went back to Humboldt State to get my teaching credential. And while I was doing that, that's when I got a job as an instructional assistant at John Muir Charter Schools. In 1998 was the first year of the school. The school had just been founded right before I got a job there. And the teacher, this guy, Tom Honeycutt, he was one of the founding teachers and I was his assistant. And we were both doing our teaching credentials at the same time. So we were friends. And so I went to work for him. And I say the rest is sort of history at that point. But I got my teaching credential and I tried middle school teaching for a spell, and that wasn't a good fit at all. And ended up going back to John Muir about 6 months later, and as a teacher this time, and I've pretty much been here ever since. So in 2003, I became the deputy director of John Muir, and then in 2011, I became the CEO. And I always say for me in education, I've always done things a little backwards. Like, I started teaching but didn't have a teaching credential, so then I went back and got a teaching credential, and then I became an administrator, but I didn't have an administrative credential, so I went backwards and got an administrative credential, and then I was administrator, and obviously once I became the CEO, I had all my credentials finally, and that wasn't an issue anymore. So it was a little winding to get here. But I can't imagine myself doing anything else at this point. I say I'm 51 years old, and I've spent 28 years now with John Muir, and I don't think I have it inside me to go do another job anymore. I think this is where I am.
Whoa. And I mean, I've heard that before where you start off as a teacher. So you said it was your mom that kind of gave you like the info, like, hey, there's a substitute teaching job in Long Beach. How did she hear about this? Was it through friends of hers, or was she?
I mean, I would say, to me, like, my mom was an elementary and middle school teacher, and all her friends were teachers and counselors and principals. And so she just said, I know the school district needs substitutes.
Gotcha.
And there, I think I'd say older educators in California especially remember that in the 90s there was a huge teacher shortage, kind of much like what we have right now. And so districts were really, really pushing like to get substitutes at that time. The kind of the credentialing laws were different in the 90s. So they wanted substitutes, and then they would just put you in there. And I had no experience. I mean, I had a degree in political science, and I was teaching pre-algebra. And so I was only a day or two ahead of my students in the content. I would go home.
Holy cow.
Go home. I was living with my parents, and I'd go home at night, and I'd study the content to make sure I could actually do that math. And then I'd sit at the kitchen table and lesson plan with my mom. She was doing her lesson planning, and I do my lesson planning. And that's something that like I kind of like, it stays with me now that I had this really, like, to me, a really special experience of getting to like sit and lesson plan with my mom. And my mom, at that point had been doing it forever. She was what at that time they called a standards coach. So she would help teachers meet the state content standards and work with them on their teaching craft, kind of like a coaching position. And so I had my own personal coach that helped me learn. And the other thing I think about a lot from those days is we used overhead projectors, which nowadays nobody's seen an overhead projector in years.
I remember those, yeah.
And so I had all my overhead projector like sheets that I would sit at the kitchen table with my special pens, and I would write everything and learn how to stack them so you could like pull one sheet off, do all this stuff. And
that's awesome.
When you go to the grocery store, you'd always have ink down the side of your arm from writing on the projector. And the cashier would always say like, oh, what do you teach? And I think, how do you know I'm a teacher? But then I'd overhead projector ink on my hand and arm. So yeah, I have a lot of great, like really wonderful memories of that time, and I think because of that, I was able to go like, yeah, no, I really want to be a teacher now. And so I went back and got that credential.
Man, that's so cool. And yeah, I feel like you just learned so much in that, I call it like the grinding phase, where you really have to like work to master your craft. Super cool. And then how was, before we move on to the organization, I want to ask you, like, what was it like going from teacher to administrator? Was it a easy transition or hard? Or?
No, I think it was hard. I was 28 years old when I became an administrator, which was really young. to make that jump. Usually that happens to people like in their 30s, 40s, you know. I had a great mentor at the time, which really helped, but I really missed teaching. And I think that's what you hear most from people that move from teacher to administrator is you miss getting to like hang out with students.
Yeah.
Because, you know, all our days, like everything we do is for students, and you're used to just having, you know, 30 or 40 of them around you all day long. And then all of a sudden you're kind of yanked out and put in this office by yourself. You know, and you still go out and see students and, you know, but with our, you know, when we talk about the format of the school, that wasn't as much of an option for me. I was a remote worker all of a sudden in the early thousands when that wasn't a thing, you know. And so I kept, the first thing I did was I kept teaching government and civics, which was what I had taught before. And I would, at one of our school sites, I went there every week and I taught 2 hours of civics. So I did that for quite a while. And then as I was more comfortable as an administrator, I just didn't have the time to do it anymore.
Absolutely.
So I stopped doing it. But I still miss that opportunity of just sitting with students, you know, just like being around students. And I would say, like, I think we have the coolest students in the world. And I know that most administrators would say, you know, in my school we have the coolest students, but I really do. Like, I just love our students, the young men and women we work with, and they are young men and women. They have a lot of life experience. You know, they've been through a lot of good stuff and a lot of bad stuff. You know, a lot of trauma, a lot of struggle, but they're great young individuals, and it's just a lot of fun to hang out with them. You know, I say it's like it's like for me now at 51, you're like hanging out with a cool 22-year-old. It's like, oh yeah, you know, this person's fun. It's just fun to talk to them and hang out with them and hear about their lives and what's going on. So that was hard to leave that, but you know, I think I've learned how to get as much of it back as I'm probably going to be able to. Yeah.
No, that's awesome. That's really cool. I love that this is a perfect transition. For those listening who don't know John Muir Charter School, you already explained how it's kind of remote. You have multiple locations. So please explain kind of like what is John Muir Charter Schools and what is your organization like? Just kind of paint a picture for people who don't know.
Well, we were founded back in 1998, and at that time, the founders of the school, and I would say I wasn't a founder, but I came along right after. It was all centered around the California Conservation Corps, and if you're out of California and you don't know the Corps, it's a state agency that is a workforce training program for young people. They get paid a stipend every month to be in the Conservation Corps, work 40 hours a week, do education programs, and get a whole bunch of job training and other services. And it was founded by Jerry Brown 50 years ago. Actually, this is the 50th year of the California Conservation Corps.
Cool.
As kind of like California's follow-up to the Civilian Conservation Corps from the New Deal. And it's an incredibly powerful program. I think probably one of the best youth development and workforce training programs in the country. I think people in that world know the CCC and they think like, yeah, that's California set the standard there. It's really an incredible program. So what the CCC didn't have at that time was a regular high school program for students that didn't have diplomas. And you know, life was different in the 70s, 80s, and 90s than it is now. And charter schools were still pretty new. The Charter School Act in California was signed in 1992. And so as folks were trying to figure out how to provide high school diploma programs to young people in the CCC that didn't have a diploma, you know, they tried a bunch of stuff and it eventually centered around to charter school. And so John Muir was founded. At that time, charter schools were a little bit more of the Wild West. And so I say we became a charter school by default. We weren't, nobody set out to start a charter school. We set out to provide a service to these young people in the CCC that spent their time serving their communities and their state and their country. And so we thought they should be able to have a full high school diploma just like anybody else. And that's kind of how John Muir came into existence. And it kind of went from a little ragtag group of teachers to what we are now. For anybody in California, I remember the early days of our professional development was like in a conference room above the Comfort Inn in Auburn, California, and it was like the conference room was above the carport where you drive in to check into the hotel, and so the whole conference room smelled like car exhaust,
Yikes.
But it was like we didn't have any money. We were just like a group of young teachers trying to figure it out, and we did, and over the years we started adding additional partners in, and that's when the certified local conservation corps, and there's 14 of those in California, and youth build programs, which started out as construction training programs in the 70s and now have a variety of vocational training tracks, and workforce innovation and opportunity act programs, which are federal Department of Labor funded programs. They have what's called a youth opportunity grant, and that's for 16 to 24-year-old out of work, out of school youth. And so we serve those programs as well. So if you're in any of those 4 programs, or in Job Corps, which John Muir doesn't serve, but that's another federal program, and you don't have a diploma, then you can go to school at John Muir, or there's a handful of schools like us in California, and we all hang out, we're friends, that do this work with this specific opportunity youth population.
Whoa,
Yeah.
So cool. And then how many like remote sites do you have currently?
Right now we have 36.
36. Wow.
We're trying to do some expansion right now as well, but we have 36, and I would say some of those sites have 6 students, and some of those sites have 200 students.
Yeah.
So it's really variable, and we're in very rural areas, and we're in very urban. We have programs right in the center of South LA, and we have programs in Humboldt County, in Mendocino County, just really places out where you would think in Siskiyou County, like just a stone's throw from the Oregon border in the little town of Wairika. We have a little school site there. So it could be a little bit of students, it could be a lot. I would say we're a classroom-based program, which people find really odd for how spread out we are.
Right.
But our students are in programming generally like 10 to 12 hours a day between what they're doing with their vocational training with our partners and what they're doing with John Muir. So we are classroom-based, and our students, I would say, many folks think because how we do what we do, they think like, oh, you guys don't, like your students are never in class. But they're in class from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. a lot of times, or later. Sometimes they work that whole day, they go get some dinner, they come back, and they stay in class until 9 p.m. So it's really, it's a really fascinating model. Like I find, when I talk to people about it, they're like, you do what? They can't believe that, a school like this exists, or like my colleagues at like the Los Angeles Education Corps or Sciatech also, or good friends at Youth Build Charter School. Like there's a bunch of us that we work in the same model, and it's just a really interesting way to provide education programs that nobody else does. I suppose people do it, but not quite at the level of like intensive partnership and like commingling of our programs to make sure that a young person gets all of the services and education that they need in all the areas that they need it.
Man, I mean, what's the word? Like, I'm just so impressed. For those listening, I just want to throw this in just because RJ's probably just like, too humble to bring it up, but like, you have 36 different sites and you have all these different students, and they're not your normal story of a student. They're coming in a little bit older, and they're trying to get their high school diploma. And so you would imagine like, oh, it's probably like not like very homey, for the lack of better terms. Like you probably don't know everyone on an individual basis, but you were just telling me before the podcast, like, oh yeah, like this person that you saw in the video, I went to his graduation the other day, and like, and I just think it's so cool how you meet people where they're at, and you understand like, hey, maybe normal high school didn't work for you in your past, but you're not your past, and like you tell them that they can be something, and you give them all the tools and the ammunition to tackle life. And I think it's just so cool, and I'm just so impressed by it. So just
Thanks.
congrats. What for people, because several of our listeners also kind of have these alternative high schools, but you're much different, and I'd say you're a little bit bigger than most that I've met with. What advice do you have for other charter school administrators that could potentially be listening to this podcast? Like, what's a couple things that you've done that have paid off?
Well, we say in our school, in John Muir, we say that we're a school that conforms to the student, and we don't ask the student to conform to the school. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really key piece. I think in charter schools and in traditional districts as well, there has been a really growing movement of meeting students where they are and then focusing on growth and looking at individual growth models for students instead of growth models of comparing this year's 8th graders to next year's 8th graders, or some of the things we see in more standardized assessment programs. But I think that's the main thing. And I think the other thing is at John Muir, because we're so spread out, I couldn't do this job if I didn't trust my staff. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the number one thing is at John Muir, and just about any school that I've been in touch with and worked with, we have these incredibly talented and dedicated teachers. And just like in any other industry, we have to trust those people to do their jobs. Yeah. Like they went to school for this. I say nobody becomes a teacher because they're like, oh, I don't know what else to do. You become a teacher because you like to work with kids, you like to work with young people, you're passionate about your subject area, you want to share that passion. People become teachers for a lot of reasons. What they don't do is say, oh, I couldn't figure out what to do with myself, so I became an algebra teacher. That's just not even in the realm of possibilities. And so everybody in this job, they have worked really hard to be able to share knowledge with students. And so we have to trust them to be able to do that. And in my setting, a 17-hour drive from my house, I have a school. And there's one teacher that's up there doing that work. And, I can't stop by their classroom. Yeah. I could get on a plane and rent a car and drive 6 hours and then be at that classroom. But you really have to just say that's a professional and I trust them. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the number one thing. And I'm always really open with our teachers to say, you're a professional, I'm going to trust you to do your thing. If I feel like you're not quite making it, then we'll talk and we'll say we'll find out how we can support you to make it. But what I'm not going to do is micromanage every piece of what a teacher does, because there's no one thing that works. I think that's the other big thing that I would tell new charter school leaders or new educators at any level is there's no one thing that works. There's no one curriculum or practice or methodology that works. I've been doing this a long time now, and I've been through every series of letters you can imagine, from EEEI to all these things. Now it's scaffolding. There's just in the pedagogy of what we do, of our practice, there's always new things coming out, and that's really incredible because there's no one thing that is going to work, and you have to be able to try a variety of things. So what we encourage our teachers to do is to focus on what's going to work for each student. And you have to be very individualized with our student population, but there isn't you're not going to find any of our teachers standing in front of the class doing a lecture style thing or anything, but you will see our teachers moving around, working with students, talking, and I think this is true of teachers everywhere. But there's no one thing that's going to work. You have to do a lot of things. And I think the third thing I always tell young educators and young leaders now is education is a business. And it's not a business about making money. I always say it's a business about spending money, because most of our money comes from the state of California or the federal government. A lot of charter schools fundraise, we get grants, we do all sorts of stuff. But we have to run it like a business, because if we go broke, it's not just our jobs, it's a school that serves young people. Those young people don't then have the opportunity to be a part of the system. So we have to treat it like a business, and that requires a lot of skills that school leaders often just don't have. And I think one of the places charter schools really excel is that most charter schools, and especially ones like ours, they'll have a CEO or an executive director, and they're doing a lot of the business of running a school. We have educational leaders that really focus on the education. I would say, like, I was a good teacher. I was by no means the caliber of teacher that, like, I have teaching at John Muir. I taught at John Muir, but and I was good at what I did, but what I found out I was really good at was working with people, with studying, educational finance, with studying policy, with, and doing a lot of that work that in big districts, district offices have staff that do that. We just don't see them.
Yeah.
And in charter schools, like, we're little, right? And so, so you do see that there's, like, a person at a charter school, and it doesn't matter if there's, 200 students or 10,000 students. There's going to be somebody that's focused on those pieces. And, like, for us, I have an incredible CFO, like my chief operations officer. Her name is Dawn. She's brilliant. I always tell her, she probably gets tired of me telling her, like, she is one of those brilliant educators I've ever met.
Wow. Yeah.
And I have to let her do her thing. Like, I can't stick my nose in it.
Mm-hmm.
I got to let her do her thing and trust that she's going to do it. And that's the same with my teachers. Like, I trust them. I have, like, for us, we have, like, regional principals. We call them regional directors. Like, Lita and Christina, and Gary, my 3 regional directors, like, they are incredible educators. And I have to know that they're going to do their jobs. So, and that lets me do my job, of supporting them. I would say I'm the unfun side of education. and for new education leaders in charter schools or district schools or anywhere, it's like, we're the unfun side of it.
Yeah.
But somebody has to do the unfun side so the teachers can do the really great work that they do.
Man, super cool. I mean, to summarize, I love how you said you got to meet the student where they're at and don't conform the student to the school. I see that all the time with struggling charter schools, where they just try to replicate the traditional, like, public state provided school, and they just refuse to be different, refuse to conform to the student's needs. So that's key. I love how you just trust your people, and let them operate, let them do their job. So with all the success you've seen, the impact you've had in the state, what are some of the current challenges you face? Or it could be past challenges. What are some past or current challenges you're facing? I'm just curious to know, and, like, what you're doing to try to overcome what you're going through or have been through.
I mean, I think in charter schools, or really I would say, charter schools are public schools, and we face the same challenges all public schools face. Sometimes it's in a more, like, focused level, because we're generally not huge operators. But funding is always a challenge. And I would say in California, like, our funding is decent. We're not the top, but we're not the bottom. And it's decent, but California as a whole is in declining enrollment. And I think that, there's a lot of school districts and charter schools that are up against a fiscal cliff right now because we had a lot of COVID money coming in, we had a lot of extra funds during COVID, and that kind of carried us for these 5-6 years. But California just doesn't have as many kids as it used to, and so population growth is neutral, and school enrollments are going down, and so schools are losing students. And in California, we're paid per student.
Yep.
If a student goes to school 183 out of 183 days, you get that one ADA, and that's, I'm not going to postulate on what that's worth because it's a little different per student. But as we lose students, we lose funding, and that means we're continually shrinking our program. So I think, right now, public schools and charter schools are competing for a declining amount of resource. And so I think that's something we're all struggling with, regardless of which side we work in, what world we work in. So that's obviously a struggle.
Yeah.
I think we're all dealing with the ramifications of COVID in our students. We had a generation of students that didn't go to school for 2.5 years. And
crazy.
Charter schools and traditional schools alike did an incredible job of doing everything they could, but none of us were prepared for that when it happens. I know I certainly wasn't. I think we rebounded pretty quickly, and I think we did as best we could. But was it as strong as like being open and seeing our kids every day? No, it wasn't. Are we a program that specializes in independent study and distance learning? Like, that's not what we do. So in a lot of districts, I can't imagine what it was like for Long Beach Unified or Los Angeles Unified or a big district, just knowing the struggles that I went through, and John Muir went through. I couldn't imagine having to do that. But we have students now that are entering our program that have 0 credits, 0 high school credits, because they were in middle school or their freshman year in high school when COVID happened, and they just never went to school again.
Holy cow.
And so now they're entering our programs, and they just have 0 credits. So we're starting from scratch, often with a 19-year-old or a 20-year-old. And I really do think our students are the best learners because they have a different life experience. But that's a big struggle, and I think all of us are struggling with that. And then I think with charter schools specifically, like, it's always a changing landscape, and there's a lot of people in the politics side of the world that don't like charter schools and would like to see us close down. I kind of get it, when you've done one thing one way for a long time and somebody else comes in to do this other thing, that people don't want you to do that. Charter schools are disruptors of a sort, but when I'm working with my colleagues and speaking with my colleagues at the California Teachers Association and at CSEA and some of the bigger unions, and these are folks that I speak with about legislation and different policy ideas, is like, we're all in this for the same reason, and we're all in this to help students. And so I think even though I don't think that's a dynamic that's ever going to go away. I don't think charter schools and district schools are ever going to, hold hands and be happy. But I hope we can get close to that, because I think we all do this for the same reason.
Yeah.
And that reason is to help students. And it's like I think in terms of like, can district schools and unions and charter schools be friends? Like, yeah, absolutely. I think we have a way to work in partnership to make sure that every student gets good services. Some students are going to get served better in a charter school, and I've had plenty of students that are going to be served better in a district school. And when that happens, we say, we think this is going to be a better spot for you. You're going to be more successful. And I think there's a lot of ways, and a lot of districts do say, like, hey, there's this school, John Muir, that does this thing. They work with students that are 18 and they need to work full time, and they send them to us. So I think we can grow that. But I think those are the 3 challenges that I really see facing schools right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see the same thing. We have some partner schools Charter Connect works with in California, but nationwide, that's just people are struggling with enrollment. There used to be a time when all you had to do was wake up and you would have new enrollments coming through the door, and people are realizing like, whoa, like I actually have to have like a strategic fiscal marketing game plan in order to continue growing. So interesting. We're kind of getting towards the end of the podcast. I honestly just wanted to open the floor to you to see like what's going through the CEO of John Muir Charter Schools head right now. Like, what would you like to bring up? What are some interesting things that you're dealing with? Yeah, I'd like to just hand it over to you to see that end of the spectrum to end the podcast.
I'd say there's Don, my COO, and I. We have this conversation a lot of days of like what were you chewing on at 3 a.m. when you couldn't sleep? What were you rolling around in your head? And I mean, in my role, that's often money. We have all these programs that we need to fund.
Yeah.
And there's just not enough money to do it. And so like. Where can I get this money? Where can I get that money? I mean, I think like any other business, I'm thinking about like capital outlay. I'm thinking about inventory. I'm thinking about human resources. I'm thinking about all of those things all the time because that's in service to our students, as the unfun side. Yeah. So I spend a lot of time thinking about that. And I don't have any good answers. I think that's the other thing is there's a lot of experts in the educational world that are probably smarter than me in a lot of things, and those are the folks I turn to say like I don't know what to do right now. I don't know if you're familiar with Eric Premack at the Charter School Developmental Center. No. And his team, like best nuts and bolts charter school trainers and professional organization probably anywhere in the country. Like I'm on the phone and on the email to those guys all the time saying like I don't know how to do this. I've got an incredible relationship with my charter authorizer, and I can pick up the phone and call the assistant superintendent or the superintendent, the county superintendent, and say, "Whoa, I don't know what to do right now. Yeah. Can you help?" So I think there's kind of like those things that but money is a primary one, and I think on the positive side. And this might not sound positive at the start, but one of the first things I speak to new teachers about, especially in our school, is that the content is the easy part of education. Content is incredibly important. People become an English teacher because they love literature. They love to write. People become a math teacher because they love math. But the content of teaching math, like knowing that math or knowing the skills and the standards, that's the easy part. The hard part is everything else that we do as teachers and educators. The hard part is making sure every student is fed and housed and clothed. I think a lot of people take for granted that students have a place to live, that they have food in the morning, that they have clothes to put on. It's just not the case. Can they get to school? Do they have mental health barriers? Is there addiction? Is there depression? Is there trauma? Can they see? I think a lot of people would be absolutely astonished at how many students in schools can't see and don't even understand that they can't see. They've never had an eye exam. They need glasses. Can they see? Is their hearing okay? I think there's a lot of these things that schools provide that is kind of invisible to the world of non-educators. Wow. And I think so it's the content is the easy part. It's everything else that's hard. And I think the other thing I spend a lot of time thinking about is the families of our students. We work with a population that is older. you know, over 90% of our students are low income. We have a very high English language learner population. We have high homeless foster and youth populations. Um, but you know, chances are, if a student is coming to school hungry, the people at home are hungry too. You know, and I think that's what, you know, in California we have universal breakfast and lunch, free for any student anytime, and that's a really incredible yet expensive thing to have. But those families, like if the student at school is hungry, that family's hungry as well.
Yeah.
And so the same things that we're providing to our students, we have to learn how to provide those to families. And people will tell you that's not a school's job. And I'll say, well, nobody else is doing this job. And if we want students to be successful, families have to be successful. And I think that's the other piece, is I think a lot about how can we extend what we're doing to include families, because schools are a function of community and community economic development. You know, a lot of people don't think of a school as being like a pillar of economic development in a community, but people work there. You know, a lot of money comes through schools, services come through schools. All these things come through schools. And so I think I spend a lot of time thinking about how do we expand that, because when our students and their families have the supports they need, they're successful.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, we want to produce whole human beings, but I say kind of my job as a school leader, and I say in probably the worst possible way to say this, is to create a taxpayer. You know, we need to produce people that can support themselves, that are comfortable in their lives, that they have a good background of knowledge, they can read and write and compute, they can have a job, they can pay taxes. You know, and that keeps our system moving. That keeps, you know, the military, social services, everything we need to do that keeps us whole. Like that all starts with education to me. And so we have to do a great job so everything else can happen.
That makes perfect sense. You're trying to create a well-rounded human being and a citizen that can, you know, get services from you and get a diploma, but also then turn around and give back to their community and their families.
Yeah. And I think the number one thing that I think about every day in this job is how lucky I am to work here at this school, that I have the trust and support of my governing board, but I have the best teachers and administrators and back office staff that I could ever want to work with. And I know you won't hear that from a lot of other school leaders, but I really think like I would take this team over any other. You know, if you said, RJ, build your team, I said, thanks, I already got it.
I got my team.
Yeah, I got my team. And I think that's really the thing, like we feel like a family as a school, both with our students and our staff, and we act like a family, we fight like families, and we love like families. And I think in all education, in all things in life, love makes us stronger. Mm-hmm. And so I feel really fortunate just to love what I do and love my students and love the staff that I work with every day. And I think I'm just really fortunate in that. So I think that's the final thing, just to go out on the high note, is that I think education is built on the idea that we have to love the people around us, because, you know, if you don't like the people you spend all your time with, then you're probably not a happy person. Yeah.
Man. RJ, what a cool note to end on. I mean, I'm so grateful that I flew out to California so I could meet you in person. Your story is incredible, starting from a poli-sci major and then substitute teaching all the way through working with Muir Charter Schools for 28 years. You gave a bunch of really great advice of like how this organization came to be, and you guys have really great results from it. You're producing good human beings that give back to their communities. I love the programs you do, from creating firefighters and giving them diplomas while they're going through that training, or like I've just experienced just from research, like I see the students are like hands-on, like soldering microchips, making pasta, doing all these different things, and the students feel seen and they feel like they can succeed. And I love that you just empower this unique demographic of human beings. So thank you for what you do for the state of California, for the country, and trying to make the world a better place. And so thank you for your time today and for sharing this with us.
Well, thank you so much, and to listeners out there in podcast land, check out our website, check out our partners. I always say the partners John Muir have, nobody can do this alone. Please check out our partners; they're incredible, and thanks so much for having me. This was great.
Of course. All right. Thanks for tuning in for the Charter School Connection. We'll see you next time.